Hey everybody, welcome to 4.2 Complex Numbers Part 1. Just a quick disclaimer, if you hear any cute baby noises in the background, that's just my daughter. We're both feeling a little under the weather today, so I'm having to do this video with her. But I don't think it'll be that bad. She makes pretty cute noises most of the time. Alright, let's talk about complex numbers. Well, for starters, at the top of the page, I say, we can't take the square root of a negative number, but you can simplify it. So, what does it mean to simplify it? Well, we're going to use imaginary numbers. Imaginary numbers are the square root of a negative number, really. But we're going to use the letter I for everything, and that's going to be defined as the square root of negative 1. So here's an example. What's the square root of negative 4? And you rightfully say you can't do the square root of negative 4. And that's true. So what you're going to do is you're going to split it up into two factors. The square root of 4 and the square root of negative 1. Well, the square root of 4 is plus or minus 2. And the square root of negative 1 is I, by definition. And so you just put it together. So it's plus or minus 2i. Alright, but that's basically all there is to it. So let's just get into it. Square root of 9 would be 3. And so since it's negative, you just say 3i. And don't forget to say plus or minus. That's it. Square root of 72. Well, 72 doesn't have a square root, but it's 36 times 2. And you could make one of those negative. So the square root of negative 36 is 6i. And the square root of 2 would just stay behind. And then throw that plus or minus there. Alright, this one, just kind of like a trick question. What's the square root of 16? 4. It would be plus or minus 4. And then there's a negative on the outside. So guess what? A negative times a plus or minus, it's still going to make it be plus or minus because two negatives make a positive, and a negative and a positive make a negative. So you say the final answer is plus or minus 4. That's it. Okay, so here we have a fraction, a math teacher's best friend. But what's the square root of 4 over 9? Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 9 is 3. So you're going to say 2 over 3. Throw an I there. And throw your plus or minus in front. And that's it. Okay, E. What's the square root of negative 9? Well, that is 3i. Okay. And so that's plus or minus 3i. And we have this negative 5 on the outside. So you have negative 5 times plus or minus 3i. That's basically what you have. Just multiply those two numbers together. That's going to be 15i. And for the same reason before with that on C, it's still going to end up being plus or minus. So you're going to say plus or minus 15i. Okay, so that being said, why don't you try the next 4, and then I'll give you some explanations. Alright, pause the video and give it a go. Okay, so let's start with A. Negative 4 square root turns into plus or minus 2i. That's really all there is to say about that. B is 4 times 3. And so I say plus or minus 2i times square root of 3. It's important to note that the I is always going to be on the outside of the square root symbol, or the radical, I should say. So anytime you're splitting it up into two factors to simplify it, just throw the negative with the thing that can square root. Alright. C, Well, that's going to be negative times plus or minus 6i, and that doesn't change anything, so the answer is still plus or minus 6i. The last one, a little tricky, 2 times the square root of negative 54. So what two numbers multiply to get negative 54? That's just my daughter banging on stuff in the background. Negative 9 times 6, square root of negative 9 is 3i. And square root of 6 stays behind. And so 2 times 3i is going to be plus or minus 6i times the square root of 6. Okay? Let's move on to the next section. Alright, let's talk about adding and subtracting complex numbers. The idea of it is actually pretty basic in that you treat the I as if it were a variable like an x, and so you just really add and subtract like terms. So, I didn't make it too complicated here, but when it says write your answer in standard form, let's just like put the number that's not the I first. That's pretty much it. So, look. What's 8 plus 5? 13. What's negative I plus 4i? That would be 3i. So I'm going to say plus 3i. That's it. That's all there is to it. So what is 7 minus 3? That would be 4. And then what is negative 6 minus negative 6? I. So that would become negative 6 plus negative 6i, and that would just make 0i, wouldn't it? So, hey, guess what? 4 is the final answer. C. Alright, so I got 13 minus 2. So we're going to, distribute that negative, basically. So if you want to write this all in one statement, that's fine too. And so it's actually quite simple because the like terms are right next to each other. 13 minus 2 is 11, and negative 7i plus 5i would be negative 2i. And that's the final answer. Alright, so guess what? Why don't you try these three? Alright? Okay, for letter I, 10 plus 3 is 13. Negative 2 plus I is negative 1i. So 13 minus I is the final answer. B. I wrote it a little differently. Maybe, I feel like maybe I did it too simple up here. So I, distributed the negative. So, and then I rewrote it. So I got negative 6 minus 5i minus 2, and then it becomes plus 5i. So I have negative 5i plus 5i. That makes 0 again. So negative 6 minus 2 is negative 8. The last one, 20 minus negative 1, and 20 minus 8i. So I distributed the negative. It becomes 20 plus 1. And 20 minus 8i. So 20 plus 1 is 21. Negative 8i plus 4i is negative 4i. Alright, let's move on to the next section. Alright, so this last section here, multiplying complex numbers, just gets a little bit tricky. Hopefully nothing too bad. So you get 4i times negative 6 and 4i times I. And 4i times negative 6 would just get you negative 24i. And then here you get 4i times I. So I'm going to write plus 4i squared. And so we're going to have a lot to say about what I squared means. So think about it. I, by definition, is the square root of negative 1. So what if I go and I square it? Well, anytime you square square root, you're just left with that number on the inside. We went over that on the last section when you rationalize the denominators. So, if you're going to square I, you're going to get just -1. So, let me rewrite it. -24I plus 4 times -1. That's really what it's saying. And your final answer will be -24I minus 4. And then since the non-imaginary number should go first, I just rewrote it as it going first in red. And that's that. So anytime you multiply an I term times an I term, it's going to end up multiplying by a -1. So here I have, on letter B, I have more terms. So you're going to have to distribute everything or do the box method. And I'll do the box method just to show you what I mean. Okay, so when you're multiplying two binomials, you'll either do the FOIL method or this box square, Punnett square method. It really doesn't matter, whatever helps you the most. Now, with the box method, it's kind of easier to see your work. What's 9 times -4? It's -36. What's 9 times 7i? 63i. And then, see, if I were doing the FOIL method, now I'm going to do -2i times those two terms. So, what's -2i times -4? That's 8i. And then, what's -2i times 7i? So, I'll show my work down here, -2i times 7i. Well, let's get the easy part out of the way. It's -14 when you multiply the two coefficients. -14i squared. But I squared turns into -1, so it says -14 times -1. So that's just going to be +14. So look what we have here. We have like terms here, regular numbers without any i's, and then we have like terms here with numbers with an I. So let's just put it all together. So -36 plus 14 would be -22. So -22. And then -63i. No, 63i positive. Plus 8i, 71i. So you're just going to say plus 71i. And that's that. Okay, so with these last two examples, why don't you give it a try on your own? So pause the video now, and then I'll go over them. Okay, so with the first one, 15i times -1 got me -15i, and 15i times 2i got me 30 times I squared. So that becomes 30 times -1, which makes -30. And so I wrote that number first to keep it in standard form, -30 minus 15i is my final answer. The second one, I showed my work with the distribution method, or the FOIL method as it's sometimes called. So what's 4 times 11? 44. 4 times 8i, 32i. Then I did -12 times 11, which got me -132i, and -12 times 8i got me -96i squared. So -96i squared becomes -96 times -1, which becomes just a 96. So our plus 96 right there. I combined these two to make -100i, and then I just brought down the 44. So now I'm going to do 44 plus 96. That's going to get me 140 minus 100i for my final answer. And that's going to wrap up these notes. If you're one of my students, please take the exit quiz after this. You can keep retaking the exit quiz until you get 100. And yeah, if you think I made any mistakes, leave me a comment below. All right, bye everyone.